Welcome back. Brian Mooney here. This talk is going to be in relation to the whole area of apprenticeships and training, and it's my great privilege to introduce you to Virginia Bowen, who is going to outline to you all of the opportunities that are available in this sector, and obviously we'll take some questions afterwards. Welcome, Virginia.
Hi, Brian. How are you?
I'm good.
Good.
So what have you to say to our students today?
Okay, I suppose just to say I've been working the whole area of apprenticeship for a long number of years, and I just think the changes that have happened in the sector are just, they're phenomenal. And I think we've gone from having 25 existing craft trades over now into having almost 60 new apprenticeships. And I think by the time we progress on, and by the time a lot of the students that are going to be leaving school will have even more apprenticeships. And I think it's important that people are aware of this whole model of earning and learning at the same time.
Okay. Well, I'm sure the students are looking forward with great anticipation to what you have to tell them, Virginia. So okay. I'll leave it to yourself at this stage. Away you go.
Okay. Thanks, Brian. Okay, so slides. Okay, sorry, I'm just a little bit of a technophobe. So anyway, look, as Brian said, my name is Virginia Bowen, and what my job, just to sum it up, is I work with employers who want to take on apprentices in Kilkenny City and County, and I work with apprentices to try and get them through their apprenticeship. So one aspect, how I would describe it, is to kind of, manage the tension between an employer's right to make profit, because if employers aren't making profit, well, then they're not going to be recruiting apprentices. And then the other side of it is to support apprentices with their right to learn throughout their apprenticeship. So another aspect of my job that I really quite enjoy is I go out to schools and I talk to students about what an apprenticeship is and isn't. And one of the questions I often ask is, what are their perceptions, or what words come to mind when they think of the term apprenticeship? And inevitably it'll be things like carpentry, trades, electrician, all kinds of things that we would normally think about when we think about the word apprenticeship. And they're all valid and they're all correct. And I suppose the other thing that I'm hearing more and more of is, well, I know there are new apprenticeships, but I'm not quite sure what's happening with them. So I'd like to just use this presentation as an opportunity to kind of explore some of the traditional craft apprenticeships, and then also to talk about some of the new opportunities that are coming along and that are there currently, and that more that will be coming along. Okay, so I mean, just looking at that slide there, I suppose it's a nice kind of visual look about what an apprenticeship is, and it's about that kind of formal education and training aspect, and it's about work-based learning as well. And both of those are structured and they're formal. It's not like doing work experience or working a weekend job or something like that, because there is a structure and a curriculum behind each of the apprenticeships. And the important thing, again, is, of course, you are getting paid throughout your apprenticeship. So I think visually, just that's a kind of a very clear message just to give people. The definition that we talk about should be up there on the slide. Yes, it is. Okay. So an apprenticeship is a dual system. It's a structured, formal program between working with education and training providers and with employers. And the relationship between education and training providers and the employer depends on the type of apprenticeship that you're doing, in terms of whether it's a block release or whether it's a blended learning program, or what that contains. So going back to what I mentioned earlier on, just in relation to the traditional craft apprenticeships, which is probably what most people would associate. And you'll notice there they call them pre-2016 apprenticeships. And I might just talk a little bit about that maybe towards the end if I get a chance. So when we talk about the craft apprenticeships, what we're talking about are the kind of the established routes into certain occupations in Ireland. Okay, so you can go off to college and you can do a degree in electrical engineering. It will not make you an electrician. We often have situations where people have gone to do degrees and have come back and said, you know what, I would prefer to be doing something much more practically orientated. And so if we could just leave that slide there for a second. Thank you. So it is the defined route to a range of occupations in Ireland. There is some bias maybe that has been traditionally against maybe working necessarily with your hands, but there are people who very much that's what they want to do. So The craft apprenticeships are generally 4 years in duration. We talk about 7 phases. They're on and off the job during that period of 4 years. And we have a continuous intake policy as well. So traditionally, I would say this period of time from about September to Christmas tends to be very busy with registrations. We're registering people all the time. It tends to quieten off in January, February, and then it gets busier again then from the end of February into the summer. And I think from my experience, that's kind of based on the fact that employers maybe are a little bit reluctant to kind of recruit apprentices at the beginning of the year. They need to forecast and say, well, what's my work schedule going to be like? Am I going to be able to make that keep that commitment to keeping an apprentice employed? Sorry, just bring up that other slide again, if you wouldn't mind. Thank you. So that continuous intake is important, and it can be frustrating for some people when they're waiting to try and get that started with an employer, because it's not like a college course that's going to start on the first Monday in September. There is a continuous intake, and employers are constantly registering apprentices. We do offer a bursary in female apprenticeships, for female apprentices in the craft area. So, and when we look at the next slide, we'll get a sense of why that might be the case. So if you look at this slide, this is all the areas of current craft apprenticeships that we have on offer. I know it's a little bit hard to see, but just draw your attention to some of it. So we group apprenticeships in terms of family of activity. So we can see the construction family of trades, we can see the electrical family of trades, engineering, and then there's also motor. So traditionally, these tend to be more male-dominated activities. So hence the state and the government, they make a commitment to try and encourage employers to take on more females into the traditional craft areas. And I have to say, in my experience, I would say most employers are really, really keen to try and get more women into these areas. I actually have 2 employers at the moment who've been on to me to say, look, we'd really love to get a female plumber in because we just think it will be good, it's healthy. And I suppose a lot of employers too, they have daughters that might be interested in getting into the trade. So there is generally, in my experience, a fairly positive view from employers trying to get more females into the trades. So as you can see, they're all very kind of, some probably surprised, maybe somebody didn't, some people often say to me, why isn't welding up there? I mean, welding isn't a craft as such. It's an aspect of many different apprenticeships. It's an aspect of metal fabrication, of pipe fitting and many others, but it's not a standalone apprenticeship, okay, at the moment anyway. So maybe just moving on to the next slide. So I've mentioned earlier on about the on and off the job phases. So it's quite simple. An apprentice starts in September 2020. The earliest they'll qualify is September 2024. And during those 4 years, they go through a series of alternating on and off the job phases. So phase 2 is the first off the job phase, and that's generally the longest phase, and it's in a training centre environment. And you will get a lot of support. The apprentice will get a lot of support on phase 2 because it's a training centre environment. Going into phase 4 and 6, they obviously get a lot of support from the Institutes of Technology as well. But it's, you know, it's a tougher kind of an environment in as much as you have a lot of exams and there's a very tight timetable that you have to adhere to. So potentially some, for example, motor mechanics, they would have up to 10 exams to do on phase 4, phase 6. And those exams on the block releases or the off-the-job phases are a combination of theory-based exams and also practical exams and drawing exams too, depending on the craft that the apprentice might be interested in. Okay, so just moving along then to the next one. So this whole model makes sense. Earn and learn, get a qualification, and be paid at the same time, and in an activity, hopefully, that somebody's really enjoying. A number of years ago, the government had started a discussion with a range of different industries to try and see how could we roll out the model of apprenticeship to a wider range of sectors. And essentially, that's what happened. So we now have nearly 60 apprentices, including the 25 existing craft apprenticeships. So you can see that there's been, in the very short space of time, there have been a lot of developments in relation to new apprenticeship areas. And that's just what I'd like to talk about now, because I just think it's a very exciting time for apprenticeship. And it's a very, from the point of view of school leavers and potential job changers, to be aware of the new range of activities for apprenticeship and bearing in mind that this number is constantly increasing and there are new apprenticeships in development all the time. Okay, so I'm assuming most people looking at this will be familiar with this. This is what they call the QQI framework of qualifications. So every single qualification in Ireland is mapped on this framework. So the current craft apprenticeships are mapped there at level 6. With the new apprenticeships, we now have a range of apprenticeship qualification levels and different kind of approaches to how they're being developed or how they're being rolled out. So we now have qualifications going from level 5 all the way up to level 10, up to a doctorate level. So it is exciting that the concept of apprenticeship is being used in this way and is addressing industry needs, because at the end of the day, that's what's key to the apprenticeship program. So just on to the next slide there. Okay, so I think we're just going to have a quick look at the key features of all apprenticeships. And because my eyesight is so bad, I'm just going to put on my glasses here to make sure that I can see everything here. So this applies across the board in relation to craft apprenticeships and the new apprenticeship. So if you recall, I mentioned about the government engaging with various industry sectors, and SOLAs were a key part in this, obviously. And so they're all led by industry. So if they're led by industry, they're industry specific and they're related to the skills that industry need. They lead to levels 5 and 10 on the framework, as I've said. They're now between 2 and 4 years in duration. Some of the apprenticeships now are only 2 years. And we can, for example, the accounting technician apprenticeship, which is one of the first ones to be rolled out, that's now a 2-year apprenticeship. And they're all a minimum of 50% on the job learning. And I would say in my experience, they're generally a good bit more than 50%. With the exception of the craft apprenticeships, they all have a different delivery process. So again, just to take the example of the accounting technician one, that now is delivered over a 2-year period, and 1 day a week, the apprentice is in a formal training environment. And what's key to that is that the employer obviously is paying the apprentice for the period of time that they're gone. So they're paid for 5 days and they have block release, if you like, 1 day a week. The state funds the off-the-job training in as much as they obviously make the resources available. Just to go back to that slide again, thank you. And the apprentices are employed under a formal contract of apprenticeship. And the last thing, again, just to emphasise it, is the apprentice is paid for the duration of the apprenticeship. Okay. So just now to get a sense and a flavour of the different types of areas of apprenticeship now that we're involved with is, okay, so we've covered some of those earlier on. We've covered the construction family of trades. We've covered the electrical. We've covered motor very briefly. And what I would say, and I'll probably have to emphasise it again at the end, is that I know I skimmed through some of the what is actually involved in some of those apprenticeships, but I would really encourage everybody to access the new website, www.apprenticeship.ie. That website will give you information on all the craft, what's involved, what the admission criteria or the entry criteria are. So just again, to keep an eye on that website. Okay, so just to go back to that slide again for 1 second. Thank you. Okay, so you can see now we've gone from having 4 families, if you like, motor, construction, engineering and electrical. We now have apprenticeships in biopharma, we have apprenticeships in financial services, in property, in ICT, hairdressing, huge range of new apprenticeships now being developed. And just to give you an overview, and again, I appreciate that this is probably a little bit small, but just to give people a sense of the range of apprenticeships that are available now. So we have a number of them in information technology. We've the software developer, network engineer, the cyber security ones. Within the engineering sector, we have added a number of apprenticeships there. There's one there on OEM, which is the original equipment manufacturing. That apprenticeship was actually started by a company up in Cavan, and it was kind of brought together with other industry providers. So what that is are companies who are manufacturing original pieces of equipment, largely for export, but not always. And they've now developed a 2-year apprenticeship, and it's really excellent apprenticeship, just to keep an eye on it as well. Also, we have a lot of hospitality services type apprenticeships as well. And I think the lab and the biopharma ones are really interesting, very strong support from the pharmaceutical industry to try and get these apprenticeships off the ground. And, you know, while they tend to be, the employment aspect of that apprenticeship will be in areas like Cork, Limerick, Dublin, places where there are strong kind of biopharma companies. I don't think there's anything else I really want to say about that just for a minute, just keep going with it. So the entry requirements, this is always tough because at the end of the day, it is an employment contract and you have to find an employer who's willing to register you. Now, that doesn't sound that's not quite as random as it sounds, rather. So that's part of what my role is in terms of approving employers to train apprentices. So the entry requirements for each apprenticeship, they vary depending on the apprenticeship. So again, I would be directing people to www.apprenticeship.ie and to look for each of the apprenticeships to see what the entry criteria are, particularly for the newer apprenticeships, because they all have slightly different entry criteria. Generally, it is Leaving Cert standard, and some would emphasise maybe maths more than other apprenticeships. So just moving back there, okay. So again, emphasising that you are paid for the duration of your apprenticeship. The rate of pay does vary depending on the industry. So if I could just very briefly just go back there to, actually I'll go to the next slide and just talk very briefly about the craft apprenticeships. So as I said earlier on, they're a minimum of 4 years. Quite often, because apprenticeship has a statutory underpinning, an employer, they can be paid less than minimum wage because there is that relationship whereby the employer is investing in the apprentice and learning and teaching the apprentice on the job. So generally, a first year in the craft apprenticeships would vary between €200 and €300 a week. By the time they progress through into their fourth year, they've obviously developed more skills. They're more benefit to the employer, if you like. And so the rate of pay would go up significantly by up to about €600 or €700 a week by the time an apprentice is into their fourth year. Maybe I should say between 500 and 650 by the time the apprentice is into their fourth year. So just go back to that last slide, if I could, just for 1 second. Thank you. Okay, so again, what I'm trying to talk about is how you access getting that employer, how you access finding an employer. And that's kind of presuming that you've gone through the process of saying, look, this is the area that I want to get into. And obviously talk to people who are already involved in the particular apprenticeship that you're interested in. If it's the craft apprenticeships, I would really encourage people to talk to my equivalent all around the country. As I said, I work with companies in Kilkenny. Every single ETB has at least one, if not two, three training advisors who work with employers and with apprentices. So certainly as the first port of call, you do need to come and have a chat with us. Obviously, a lot of this is being held virtually now. Like at any one time, people in roles like myself around the country would be aware by contacting and talking to their employers on a daily basis who's actually looking maybe potentially to take on an apprentice, where the growth areas are and so on. So if it's the craft apprenticeships, I would really encourage people to come and talk to your local training advisor. And all of those details can be found on the contact page on www.apprenticeship.ie. So if I could just bring back that other slide just again for 1 second. Okay, so the next point just to make is in relation to the new apprenticeships, just to be aware that in each event, these new apprenticeships, as I said, have been led by industry. So there is a lead industry representative and a lead education training provider. And quite often it's managed by a consortium of employers. And they will have appointed people who quite often are dealing with the recruitment process for the new apprenticeships. So, for example, again, just taking the accounting technician one, the IATI, the Institute of Accounting Technicians in Ireland, they have an expression of interest on their website for people who want to be considered for the accounting technician's apprenticeship. And again, contact them. The first port of call will be www.apprenticeship.ie, and then through that you can access the information and who you need to contact for some of the newer apprenticeships, because, as I said, they quite often do manage the recruitment. The new apprenticeships tend to have more fixed starting dates. So quite often it's January and September that those apprenticeships start. And as I said, the craft apprenticeships are continuous intake. Again, like really look, I mean, I know from talking to employers, there's some employers who will only advertise now through Facebook. So find out what's going on. Talk to people who are existing apprentices. They may be able to put you in contact with their employer. Just get the word out there that you're interested in starting an apprenticeship. And just, I think that's pretty much, I mean, follow apprenticeship on all the social media things there, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter and LinkedIn. And I think that's pretty much all I have to say, Brian. I'm open to having questions. I'm not sure how long I took. Hopefully I didn't take too long.
No, Virginia, that was absolutely fantastic. As somebody worked in guidance all my professional life, certainly for the second half of it, there was I don't want to use the word stigma, but it probably is the correct word around the term. I sometimes jokingly would refer to students doing medicine in university as doing an apprenticeship in medicine, because that's effectively what it is. But once we put the word apprentice to something in the Irish culture, I don't know whether it's specifically Ireland, there seems to have been a negative connotation. Whereas if you look at Germany, where apprenticeship is basically a 50-50 academic route, apprenticeship route, do you find it difficult to break down that perception or that negativity around the word apprenticeship when you are trying to interest young people and their parents specifically in allowing them to pursue apprenticeships?
I think it's interesting, Brian, when you include parents in that. So when I go out to the school talks, and as I said, all my colleagues, we all contact all the schools in whatever region we find ourselves in. And, you start talking about that whole notion about, what their perception is around apprenticeship. And you're right, there is still that negativity. And, if I'm standing in front of a group of young fellas, and quite often it is young fellas, although we do go to girls' schools as well, you do get that sense. But hopefully by the time I've gone through it and I've spoken about, the whole concept, particularly the earning and learning at the same time, it becomes a bit of a no-brainer. And I wonder, is the bias more about working with your hands, that in some way by working with your hands, that's seen as less than in comparison to other careers and other options? I have loads of examples of situations where people have gone to college, started engineering degrees in UCD, very high points, and come away from the college environment, shortly after starting and think, you know what, I don't like the lack of structure in the college environment. I struggle with that because, think about students who are coming from a very structured second level environment into the third level sector where, they're left to be more self-motivated. And quite often a lot of people do struggle with that. And I think the thing about an apprenticeship is you're going to be busy. You're working, you're going to be busy, and you are also engaging in some kind of formal learning and education environment as well.
And the employment opportunities, because if you go to college, you do a degree, you're engaging with the placement people in the college, you're looking at the opportunities to engage with employers, whereas through the apprenticeship route, in a sense, you're almost guaranteed employment at the end of the process because you're actually in the system. Would you want to comment on that?
Yeah, completely. And I think the other thing too is just to note is the progression opportunities, even after doing an apprenticeship. And again, I know that our conversation right now is kind of more focused on the craft apprenticeships, but equally the new apprenticeships, people are having the opportunity to work in an environment being molded by the employer's needs and also getting their qualifications. But I think the opportunities for people to progress once their apprenticeship is complete needs to be really emphasized as well. Like, and I often think, and if people reflect on it to any real level, a lot of our small and medium enterprises are built on the back of, people who've gone through the apprenticeship program and are now, employing people themselves. And that's, I can think of a number of companies where one not too far from where I am at the moment. And, companies started by two brothers and they now employ 300 people and have over 70 apprentices. Yeah. So that opportunity to show if you have that kind of entrepreneurial initiative, that's definitely available to you as a qualified craftsperson. Other avenues are things like going into teaching, going into project management, health and safety, huge number of activities to progress into on completion of the apprenticeship.
You mentioned the accounting technician. In one of my other hats, I chair the BlackRock Further Education Board, and we have that program. And many of our students are progressing directly on to becoming fully chartered accountants within, I think it's about 3 years, from the end of the apprenticeship. So, I mean, somebody goes and does a BCom at university, they end up as a chartered accountant. Somebody does the 2-year apprenticeship, 3 years later, they're a chartered accountant. There's no difference.
Yeah, and you're trying to constantly get that message out to people to say, you know what, this makes sense. And even, one of the comments that, if you think about teaching, even as a profession, education, so you could go and do potentially now it's 6 years because you have to have your master's in education, and you're coming out and you're starting at entry level into teaching, which is what it is. A qualified electrician, for example, coming out, potentially their starting salary is probably in around 45,000. That person equally could possibly find themselves in an institute of technology lecturing if they went on and did further studies in terms of education and training themselves. So yes, the opportunities are very great. And meanwhile, the electrical apprentice is being paid throughout their apprenticeship.
As a teacher all my life, you do realise that there is a cohort of young people and adults as well, where learning through doing is far more suitable to their aptitudes. I remember when previously we used to recruit people into the area of, say, chefing, which we through Features of ALL Apprenticeships. And then they were abolished and they went into courses in the ITs. And then the young people who wanted practical courses found themselves sitting in lecture theatres, listening to lectures, and got bored and dropped out. So now we have a new program through yourselves, the Chefing Apprenticeship, which is, in a sense, reinventing what was there previously. And I think it drives home the message, that learning through doing is far more suitable to a cohort, and it's not second best or it's not in any way inferior. It's just a different way of learning. And if you ask yourself the question, really, let's take, for instance, the insurance apprenticeship up in Sligo. It's a level 8 honours degree. At the end of the day, it's industry-led, and you end up with a qualification which takes you into the insurance industry, and it's a level 8 degree. So what differentiates that from another university degree programme?
Well, if you had the answer to that, Brian, I'd love to be, because I suppose your initial question was around the bias or the how people view apprenticeships, and we are at an exciting time, I think, in terms of where the government and where Solas are trying to bring apprenticeship to. And still the craft apprenticeships are dominating, but the benefits around developing apprenticeships like the insurance practitioner one, the application for people leaving school and working and getting their degree qualification through work, it's just brilliant.
Well, if you actually think about it, you're saying to young people who are looking at this and to their parents, you have the option of going through the high status one, where you pay your own fees, where you spend 3 to 4 years getting a qualification, where all the expenses are on your shoulder, and where at the end of the day you've got to go out looking for a job. Or you have an alternative through the apprenticeship structure, where you start getting paid from the first day. You're within a structured environment where you're learning all the skills, and when you graduate, you've probably already got your job.
Yeah.
And you ask yourself, why in the past have we had such a difficulty in seeing this as a valid option for somebody coming from the school, where Mammy can tell Auntie Mary that little Johnny or little Joanne is doing an apprenticeship, as opposed to the CAO course they got, And I really think that, part of that is, Irish society too, and where we're at. For some people, it might be, the first generation to go to college, and as you said, Mammy wants to be able to say to Mary, look, isn't he doing great? And he's in UCD now. Yeah. And that sounds better than saying he's doing an apprenticeship with Glambia, or he's doing, But the fact is, if you get into companies like that, your career is anything within these that craft and practical element. Yeah, I'm not sure what's going on there. No, we're okay. We're okay. I think the message, Virginia, I think has to be from both of us to young people, that if it's what you feel is suitable for you, to have the courage to go for it and to believe in it, because ultimately it's when you get up every day, it's what motivates you and drives you. And if you like working something where you're practically involved, then it's going to be so much more successful, than something that isn't quite you.
And I just say, you mentioned it earlier on, Brian, in relation to parents, and I do find quite often it wouldn't be unusual for me to end up, speaking with a parent over the phone about their concerns about, he doesn't want to take the college course, he actually has been offered an apprenticeship, and what does that mean? And I think, more and more people like me need to, talk to parents about that, because I think that is the stumbling block. And I think I read somewhere that, the main career advisor for a lot of young people leaving school now is Mammy. Yes. I think it's at 60% or something. So,
very much so.
Yeah, and I think, like it or not, I think we do need to kind of address parents as well as, because I think young people don't have that sort of same difficulty. in understanding and saying,
I think Mammy may be the problem. I have one other question, and it's from a guidance counsellor.
Okay,
and this outside of the apprenticeship, like the ESB and Dublin Bus, etc., it's about finding the information where the apprenticeship opportunities. I think you mentioned it, and you might reiterate that again, where people can get that information.
Okay, so I would say with the traditional craft apprenticeships, you really need to be talking to your local training advisor. So I work in Kilkenny. I think most of the career guidance teachers here would know me at this stage. And there is at least one training advisor, and the contact details for that are on www.apprenticeship.ie. And, keep an eye on obvious things. Like, for example, the OPW, they have been advertising for the last number of years for stonemasons and carpenters and joiners, and they do that around about April, May every year. So there are a number of agencies, not as big as Dublin Bus or the ESB, but that they will be recruiting apprentices. Talk to your local training advisor. Keep an eye, follow the apprenticeship Facebook, all of those kind of handles or whatever they're called. And finally, in relation to the new apprenticeships, you do need to go on to apprenticeship.ie, look at who the coordinating provider is, log your interest through their website, because a lot of the recruitment for those newer apprenticeships is done centrally.
Thank you very much, Virginia. That has been a really useful presentation, and I hope that a lot of young people will get courage from that and make that choice of taking an apprenticeship at the end of their schooling. Thank you very much.